Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. Well, we just had the much ballyhooed Republican presidential debate, minus Donald Trump. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. What I want to talk to you about are three fascinating interviews conducted by Tucker Carlson of three of the major party presidential candidates. Donald Trump on the same night as the debate, Republican, and Vivek Ramaswamy, Republican, right before Trump, and then right before Ramaswamy, Bobby Kennedy Jr., Democratic presidential candidate. But before I talk about those, I want to first address an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, because that editorial, or a point that's made in the editorial, provides a really interesting backdrop to what I want to talk to you about with respect to those three interviews. The Wall Street Journal, as you all know, is the premier conservative newspaper in the country. And it published an editorial addressing Donald Trump's refusal to participate in the debate. And in this editorial, they have a line that says something to the effect that there are people who are blaming America for the war in Ukraine. That point in that sentence is very, very revealing in terms of the mindset of both Republicans and Democrats. Let's examine what happened here with respect to Ukraine. At the end of the Cold War, the U.S. national security establishment, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA, had lost its big official enemy that had been the basis for really the greatest racket in the history of this country. The Reds are coming, the Soviets are coming, international communist conspiracy to take over the world, the Russians are coming, and then suddenly it looks like it's all over. But it wasn't over for the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. They were determined to get this racket going again because it had been proven so lucrative. So what they decided to do is to use NATO, which was itself an old Cold War dinosaur. It should have gone out of existence right at the end of the Cold War. But they used NATO to begin absorbing, moving eastward toward Russia, absorbing former members of the Warsaw Pact. And throughout this time, Russia is saying, look, you gave us your word. You promised, you vowed that you would not move NATO 1 inch eastward. And the response was tough luck. And so they were moving American missiles, tanks, weapons, bases inexorably closer to Russia's border. And Russia finally said, look, we're going to draw a line at Ukraine, which is right on our border. You're not going to take over Ukraine, which would mean now you're going to be claiming Crimea, which Russia was not going to tolerate. And if you cross this line, we're going to do the same thing you would do with respect to Cuba if we were putting our missiles and bases in Cuba. We're going to invade and we're going to prevent this from happening. So the response was, we're going to do it anyway. And so they make these waves about inviting Ukraine to join NATO, and then the predictable happened, Russia invades. Now, do you see anywhere in that analysis where I mentioned America? Never. That what we're doing is blaming the national security establishment for this, the Pentagon, the CIA, for this crisis. But for the mindset of a conservative, that's blaming America. Because you see, the national security establishment, the national security state, is their everything. It's their everything. In my opinion, it's their God. I mean, it's like a triune God to them. One God divided into three parts. The Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. It's their everything. And so in their minds, they conflate America with the national security state. But the truth is that we're talking about two completely separate entities here. We're talking about America, the nation, the citizenry, and then we're talking about the federal government, which includes the national security state. Those are two separate entities, not one, like conservatives believe. And the best proof of this is the Bill of Rights, which expressly protects America from the federal government, including the national security state. But that always boggles the minds of conservatives. They don't know how to process that concept behind the Bill of Rights. Now let's go to the interviews that Tucker Carlson provided, because I think that prelude is going to kind of show you the fascinating aspects of these three interviews. Let's begin with the first interview of Robert Kennedy Jr. As he has done in the past, he points to the CIA as the being behind or the orchestrator embroiled in the assassination of his uncle, President John Kennedy. Those of you who are familiar with this video blog that I've been running since February know that I commend him for this. He has shown great courage. He is the only presidential candidate, other than myself, that is willing to acknowledge and point out that this was a regime change operation on the part of the CIA and really the national security establishment, even though Kennedy can't go that far. And he's right to do this. I mean, there's no question that that's what this was. And I've detailed this. But those of you that are familiar with my work know that I've published several books in this area, given lots of presentations. My books include The Kennedy Autopsy, which details the military's fraudulent autopsy on the very night of the assassination. There's no innocent explanation for a fraudulent autopsy. It necessarily means criminal culpability. And my other book, An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder story, details how the CIA produced an altered, fraudulent copy of the Zapruder film of the assassination. There's no innocent explanation for that. It necessarily means criminal culpability. So Kennedy is right to, at the very least, acknowledge that the CIA assassinated his uncle. But notice something. He's not blaming America, okay? He's blaming one part of the national security state for this assassination. Now, as I pointed out before, what's really bizarre about his position, well, there's actually two bizarre aspects. He always gives the military a pass. He never mentions the military. The military was up to its neck. They were partners with the CIA with their fraudulent autopsy. But the other bizarre thing is he's insistent on keeping the CIA in existence. And he told Tucker this. He says, we need to keep the CIA in existence. It has a lot of good people working there. This is amazing. This is the most evil agency in U.S. history, without a doubt. MK Ultra, torture, assassinations of innocent people. I mean, it's just amazing. But you see, his mindset is he's going to bend it to his will if he's elected president. How'd that work out for his uncle? You see, because he always quotes John Kennedy as saying, after the Bay of Pigs disaster, I'm going to tear the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the winds. Because he wants to show that his uncle believed the CIA was a really malevolent entity. And it was, even back then. From the very beginning it has been. So Kennedy was vowing to destroy this agency, abolish it, which is what he should have done. But what Robert Kennedy Jr. never says is the rest of the story. The rest of the story was that President Kennedy kept the CIA into existence. He had the same mindset as Robert Kennedy, that after things settled down, after the Bay of Pigs, he fires Allen Dulles, the CIA director, his two deputies, and then he puts John McCone in, and he starts using the CIA for his own purposes. And he uses the CIA for Operation Mongoose. He puts his brother Bobby, who's Attorney General, overseeing Operation Mongoose. And Operation Mongoose was a scheme of state-sponsored terrorism and sabotage in Cuba against innocent entities there. And then for its part, the CIA is embroiled in an assassination partnership with the mafia, the premier criminal organization in the world, to assassinate Fidel Castro. So it was no problem to just shift the guns over in the direction of Kennedy and take out Kennedy instead of Castro, when Kennedy made it clear that he was no longer on the same Cold War page as the national security establishment. But notice who ends up winning here. Evil ends up triumphing. And this is what Robert Kennedy just cannot bring himself to see, unfortunately. There's only one solution to this, and you got to get rid of this entity. You don't reform evil. Now, let's go to the second interview, to Vivek Ramaswamy. So Ramaswamy tells Tucker Carlson, this is really one of the funny aspects of this analysis. Ramaswamy says, we can handle the truth. I can handle the truth. We're Americans, and we're like 1775 patriots. You know, he's hearkening back to the pre-Declaration of Independence. That we're courageous. We can handle the truth. Now, what he's referring to is that he says that the U.S. government has lied to us with respect to the 9/11 attacks. And what he's alluding to is that they've lied with respect to the possibility that the Saudi Arabian national security establishment, because they're a national security state too, was actually behind the 9/11 attacks. You know, I think it was 19 of the hijackers were Saudi citizens. And so he says, if this is the case, we can handle it. You know, we can handle the truth. You see, we're 1775 patriots. Well, the obvious question that Tucker Carlson should have asked was, well, wait a minute, Vivek, if the evidence really establishes that the Saudi national security establishment was behind this assassination, and Vivek would interrupt and say, yeah, we can handle it, we're courageous Americans. Well, wait a minute, we haven't finished the question yet. The rest of the question is, suppose the evidence also establishes that the U.S. national security establishment was working with its close counterparts over here in the Saudi Arabian national security establishment to orchestrate these attacks. I will guarantee you, Vivek would run for the hills, no more, we can handle the truth, because the national security state is their God, it's their everything, it's America for these conservatives. Now, those of you that are familiar with my work know that I've always held that the national security, that the 9/11 attacks were the direct result, the consequence, the blowback of the U.S. death machine that the Pentagon and the CIA had in Iraq. They were killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children every year, and that in large part, that's what was going on here, a retaliatory blowback strike. But I'll guarantee you this, if the evidence were to come out that the Saudi national security establishment was working with the U.S. national security establishment to undergo these attacks, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me a bit. I mean, I've seen the dark side aspects of evil. I've analyzed, I've studied it. Nothing would surprise me about these people at all. But for a conservative, oh my gosh, no, this is America, this is everything. Now, notice another thing here. This is another fascinating part of the Vivek interview by Tucker. Tucker has just conducted the interview of Bobby Kennedy, talking about the CIA assassinating President Kennedy. But he doesn't bring it up with Vivek. Now, Vivek's saying, I can handle the truth. At no time has Vivek ever done what Kennedy's had the courage to do, and that's condemn the CIA for its assassination of President Kennedy, or the military. It's all of a sudden, well, we're ready to handle the truth, but not the truth on the Kennedy assassination. And Tucker, what's amazing, Tucker doesn't ask him about this. Say, well, I just had Bobby Kennedy on talking about the assassination of President Kennedy. Can you comment on this? No, it's like Tucker has compartmentalized these 3 interviews and sealed them up so he can't refer from one to the other. But I guarantee you, Vivek Ramaswamy cannot handle that truth, because if he could, he'd be out doing what Kennedy is doing. What I'm doing is taking these people to task for these regime change operations, not just against Kennedy. There's also Patrice Lumumba, General Rene Schneider, and so forth. Now let's move to Donald Trump. Trump said in the interview that he's proud of the state-sponsored assassinations that the CIA was and the military was engaged in when he was president. So he makes no bones about it. But Tucker Carlson should have asked him a question, because Trump is over here using the deep state as another political ploy, like he used in 2016, the drain the swamp, the deep state and all this. And then as soon as he got into office, he caved. He caved in. He surrendered to these people. The CIA, the military, surrounds himself with the generals and John Bolton, kisses the ring of the CIA. And so there's no question he would do the same. It's a political ploy he's using again. But what Tucker should have asked him is, okay, given you're decrying the deep state again as a political ploy, why didn't you pardon Julian Assange and Edward Snowden? You see, because this man needs to answer that question, and he needs to be pressed about that. He needs to be pressed throughout this campaign. If he wins this Republican Party nomination from that point on to November and from this day forward, we need to press him until he finally answers. Why didn't you pardon these people? You decry the deep state. They reveal the dark side secrets of the deep state that you're now decrying again as a political ploy. And Tucker didn't dare ask him that question, because this is a fellow conservative, you see. Now, that's not all. Tucker could have also said, well, wait a minute. I just had Bobby Kennedy on just a few days ago. And he was talking not just about the assassination, but about the secret records, the assassination-related records that the CIA continues to keep secret on grounds of national security, 60 years after the assassination. And President Trump, you were the one that granted the CIA its continued secrecy when you were president. This is the CIA, the deep state that you're decrying as a political ploy to get reelected. Why did you do that? And this is another thing this man needs to be pressed on. Why did you grant the CIA's request for its continued cover-up of these assassination-related records? He didn't need to do that. He could have released them all, but he didn't. He surrendered to the CIA, and he needs to be pressed. He needs to answer that question while he's using the deep state as a political ploy to get reelected. So you see, when you look at this national security state apparatus, you can see that the mindset of Democrats and Republicans is the same. There are variations, but they all believe that this is an essential apparatus for America, that evil is necessary to keep us safe. The worst mistake America ever made, as I've long held, is the conversion of our nation to a national security state. What we need to do is get rid of this thing and restore our founding governmental system, which was a great governmental system, a governmental system called a limited government republic, with just a basic military force and a foreign policy of non-interventionism. I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. My campaign website is jacobforliberty.com.